One down! How's it going, everybody? Are you having a good night? Thank you very much for coming down. This is crazy times, and we love it.
Buffalo! Oh! Make your suppression went out of town. If the other partner when you're struck down. The way out of witness, you never know. No. And I'm on the stand. Yeah, I'm on the stand when you don't care. Try when you wanna, try when you need something from me. That's the honey. Try when you wanna and you try it on me. Try when you wanna, try when you need something from me. That's the honey. Try when you wanna and you try it on me. Oh yeah. Always loving me now, never rocking me later. Why you gotta rip it in just to lose me, huh? And once you know what makes you feel so good. And putting down pitch straight. Now was it now be right to win. Try when you wanna, try when you need something from me. That's the money, yeah. Try when you wanna and you try it on me. Try when you wanna, try when you need something from me. That's the money. Try when you wanna and you try it on me. Not I'm supposed to be cut down. A playful game, but still needs to be wound halfway. I've been a long time now. I want many letters I drew anew. Maybe time and place is just when and where we move. I'm running out. I'm running out. It's out. Oh. Oh. Try when you wanna, try when you need something from me. That's love, honey. Try when you wanna and you try it on me. Try when you wanna, try when you need something from me. That's love, honey. Try when you wanna and you try it on me. Ooh. Try when you wanna, try when you wanna. You wanna, yeah. Try when you wanna, and you wanna from me. Try when you wanna, oh you wanna, yeah. Try when you wanna and you try it on. Ooh.
Welcome to the Riff Crew. I'm your host Steve Mitchell, and welcome to another episode of The Realm. And of course, it's been a great week or a few weeks since the last show of gigs here. I'm not sure about across the Pacific though. We'll find out from Skull.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's me again in Cyberland, broadcasting from past, present, and future in the Chamber of the Cosmos. Here with my good friend Steve Oz. As you know, I've mentioned I was in a DC bomb rock band, Black Manta. I've been in the scene for 30 years, know all kinds of people, and I've been invited to fill in for Andrew for a while, and I'm really excited to be here, and especially with our our guest here, Lucas Fox. So
That's my name.
That's right. We've got the 3 time zones working here because
Yep.
over in Paris. Bienvenue.
a kind of
That's-
time travel, right?
Absolutely. You know, Back to the Future. Here we are.
And you've been in France, I guess, several decades. What brought you there in the first place, and what's kept you there?
Okay, a whole mixture of stuff. For a start, I was educated in French, not in English. I was put into the French lycée at the age of 4 because my parents were pretty anti-war, and I was born just after the war in 1953. And like a lot of people, they wanted to have, I think, little Europeans is probably the best way of putting it. And so they put us, me and my sister, into this French lycée, and I went in at the age of 4 and left at the age of 17. So I'm not a typical Brit, Pom, or Limey, as anybody might wish to talk about us. And with the greatest respect for everybody in the world listening, and lots of love to you all, I'm a great believer in people rather than flags. And I'm really not a big fan of flags. And this was part of my education, that in a class of 30 kids from the age of 4 to 17, we had maybe 15 French kids. We all spoke French all the time because it was a French school. And the other 15 kids were from everywhere in the world, including American kids. For instance, the Houstons, Angelica Houston and the Houstonoffs and all these people, who didn't want to have a typical American education for their children and didn't want the McCarthy era style education. Therefore, we had an amazing education with not just ambassadors' kids and not just traveling salesmen's kids, but kids from very poor backgrounds who were French because it was free education for French. So if you like, this gives you just a little bit of an inkling as to how strange it is that this kind of man from another planet who is bilingual and bicultural, and the bi-end's there for the moment, but never say never, who knows?
So just for my knowledge and for the viewers' knowledge, are you saying like this was a French school in London?
It is.
Oh,
It is the French. It is the French school in London. 2,500 kids at the time, invented by Napoleon, so that the children of his officers would never lose a day's schooling. So the principle was and is that if you're in a French lycée in London or Los Angeles or New York or Lille in northern France, you can basically come in there in the middle of a term and pick up pretty much where you left off from the lycée at the other side of the world. It's incredibly useful for parents who actually are mobile around the world. Therefore, all the children in this school were and are children who are used to being ferried around the world.
That's interesting. So your parents definitely were kind of thinking outside of the box at that time. You know, they, I guess, anti-nationalism or anti, you know,
very much.
Almost
very,
like
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say almost kind of like a pre-hippie kind of mentality in a way, like very kind of like utopian or like, you know, optimistic, if you will, like, you know, kind of a peace-loving kind of people, your parents.
Well, no. I mean, my mother was on the base. She was on the most bombarded base in the Second World War in the Battle of Britain. She was on Biggin Hill, which is the fighter base, okay, in 1940 when Britain was alone. And because she got terrible claustrophobia as a result of seeing so many people buried alive, including a direct hit in the station where she was actually working on a big map, and she had a direct hit. She then went on 2 years later to be the commandant of the most secret base, Churchill's most secret aerodrome in Britain. which sent out all the agents to Northern Europe and all over Europe in the Second World War. And she was the commandant of that base at the age of 23 in 1943.
Wow.
Therefore, no, pacifist, no. When I was growing up in London, all over London, every single street in London was like those wonderful tramps with teeth missing.
Mm.
Every single street had buildings missing and a great big crater. That was our childhood,
Right.
and we thought that was normal. Therefore, we grew up in a post-war era with images of burnt out, bombed out Berlin, bombed out London, bombed out Liverpool, bombed out Coventry, all over Europe. This is normal.
Mm.
This is a normal in Europe. You see, it's not like, and there's no criticism. It's just a statement of fact. It's no criticism. But therefore, Lemmy coming from close to Liverpool, where 1/3 of Liverpool was destroyed during the war, and me coming from London, we both have the same background and the
Sure.
same basic principles of knowing that people are just people and looking beyond the uniform, looking beyond the flag. And if you delve into most of Lemmy's talk and Lemmy's thoughts about all of this, it's very similar. So no, it's not a hippy-dippy situation. It's more of a situation of, well, we've all been in it together. And
Sure.
we haven't been separated by flags, or as Churchill said, two great nations separated by a common language.
Mm-hmm.
It's more the other way around of, well, we got to do better. We got to do better here.
Mm-hmm.
And constantly going behind these commercial flags and going back into those sorts of ideas doesn't really help the world. And Hawkwind certainly weren't about that. Pink Fairies weren't about that. Motörhead was never about that, any more than it was about pro-Nazi or pro-right-wing or anything like that. And you know what I mean? So, I mean, these are subjects which I know.
Well, it's about the imagery.
subjects
I read. I mean, I'm a massive Lemmy fan. I'm wearing my Saint Lemmy shirt. It's handmade by me. It says Saint Lemmy, patron saint of rock and roll. I can make you one if you're interested. I can make you a shirt. I make sure it's for fun. So if you're interested, I can send you one. But I was actually reading the liner notes, and yeah, it talks about the imagery. Now, back then, I'm really a student of like the 60s, and I went to school myself, and so like the counterculture and the hippie movement and the art movement in the late 60s, the early 70s, and how, along with the prog bands and all these other amazing artists, there was a lot of artists that came out of there. So the music and the imagery and literature and cinema, everything, there was an explosion of ideas, artistic ideas across the landscape. So
absolutely, and one of the main reasons, as far as I'm concerned, who've been studying it just like Lemmy did since our childhood, is also the fact that there was so much repression. There was the repression because of the Second World War. Before that, there was repression because of the financial crisis, the crash in 1929. There was, before that, the repression of the First World War and the 1918 flu, which caused pretty much as many deaths as the First World War. Then you spin forward into the early 50s with the fear of communism and the whole thing about nuclear war being the next best thing and all that stuff. The Cold War and the anti-Vietnam War and the whole principle of the Vietnam War and the Korean War, the whole spin-off and wars by proxy. And then we're suddenly into a situation where there's a massive rebellion against all of this worldwide, with some really, really famous stars like Jane Fonda and stuff getting involved. And we're suddenly in a situation where people are questioning this and saying, wait a minute, we don't agree with this. Napalm is not a cool weapon. And this is really a war crime, And therefore, suddenly the top blows off of this. And the oppression of the McCarthy era, which was basically keeping not just the political scene under wraps, under pressure.
Mhm.
It was also trying to keep the whole of youth under pressure, the whole of youth, you know, and hence Kerouac, hence Burroughs, hence Ginsberg, hence, you know, all these people, great thinkers who wanted to break out of this. And it's this explosion. The Beat generation, which came just before the 60s, and therefore, you know, blew the top off it. And of course, the Beatles, a direct link to that as well.
Yeah.
With you know, the famous Albert Hall Ginsberg conferences and stuff.
That was the Beatles. They were a whole paradigm shift. That was like, when the Beatles came around, that like changed everything like overnight.
Yes, well, yes and no, because during the Second World War, back to the bombs and the bomb shelters, the kids in these towns, their fathers were spattered across the world trying to defend an empire which was no more, but they were in the Army, Navy, Air Force, all over the world. And including many on British air bases. And I'm talking until 1942, of course. Therefore, that the main part of the serious bombing that Britain suffered, and their mothers were driving ambulances or working in armaments factories. Therefore, these young boys and young girls were playing in the bomb sites and discovering watches and doing black market between them, buying and selling watches, buying and selling rings. And
it's kind of dystopian in a way.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. Yeah. And these therefore are the people who formed the early skiffle groups. Skiffle being one broomstick with one string up for the bass, one string bass. Washboards, right, for the drums, and one acoustic guitar and a guy who sang. And picking up on all this wonderful influence of the American troops that were over here.
I know Jimmy Page was in a famous skiffle group or something.
And John Lennon and Pete Townsend, and you go on and on and on, absolutely. And there were 225,000 of them in Britain in the early 50s. 225,000. Now, that's enormous when you consider the size of the place. And also, suddenly, you had this breakout of need to express themselves, the youth. And of course, this thing of not wanting to all be the same. They all wanted to be different, have their own individual sound. This is where lots of people go, well, how come the British managed to come up with so many individualistic and individual bands? It comes from there. Because it became our natural thing of not doing like everybody else. The famous Kinks song, which is one of my favorite songs for myself, I'm not like everybody else. Absolutely. The whole thing was not to be like everybody else. And therefore, in some ways, it was non-competitive. Everybody was their own thing.
Right.
In the same way as you can't say, a lot of time when I've come off stage, some guys walked up or girls walked up to me and go, hey, Lucas, that was great. And the first thing they'll say is, I wish I'd have played an instrument. And I say, listen, everybody can't be on stage. Otherwise, there's no audience. That's step one. And then they go, well, who's the best drummer in the world? And I have to go, I can't even think like that. How can you compare Hendrix to Beethoven? How can you compare Joe Morello to Buddy Rich? Well,
I was going to ask you who your influences were, like who influenced you?
Influences. Well, yeah, Joe Morello from Dave Brubeck, Unsquare Dance and Take Five and all that. Blue Rondo.
What about Ringo? A lot of people say Ringo from back then.
Of course. Ringo, seriously wonderful drummer. I mean, and a very, very creative left-handed drummer. Incredible. Underrated for many years. It's only recently, with the likes of Dave Grohl suddenly waking up, that Ringo existed, and suddenly realizing that what he was playing wasn't just straight R&B backbeat. He was actually inventing all sorts of strange stuff, and mixed with, of course, George Martin, the fifth Beatle, and Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison. Incredible combination. And of course, Charlie. I mean, and Keith Richards said fairly recently that Keith wanted to be buried with Charlie. I can understand that. Charlie, what a wonderful. And then of course we talk about the tornado, Keith Moon,
Ginger Baker, Mitch Mitchell, all those guys.
Mitch Mitchell, and they're all very individualistic. All very, very different from each other. I mean, one of the prime movers in that movement was Keith Moon.
Oh yeah.
In the same way that people who start looking at Lemmy, all you Lemmy fans out there, listen to John Entwistle. Listen, work out where Lemmy's sound came from. Look at Lemmy's influences. And I know about that because Lemmy and
Thunderfingers.
Absolutely. We spent a long time together before he got kicked out of Hawkwind. And we were talking constantly, not just because of the speed, which makes you talk, of course. But yes, we were talking constantly about the Second World War. We were talking about our love of horses, because both of us rode horses, our hate of being sermoned, because his father was, basically abandoned him at the age of a very early age, and was also sort of a religious person who sermoned people. So he didn't like that. My grandfather was a man of the cloth as well, who sermoned, who was actually a very lovely person, but misguided.
You guys had a lot in common then, you and Lemmy.
Well, we did, because, I mean, we wouldn't have hung out for so long. Lemmy didn't suffer fools gladly.
Sure.
I mean, it wasn't just because I got a car. That was very useful. But we also hung out very comfortably and happily, because I'm not the sort of person who's constantly in competition with a big alpha male. A silverback gorilla like Lemmy,
like Lemmy.
So I didn't get up his nose all the time, being constantly there, but and doing all this competition shit. That's not my style, you see. So we hung out, and we're both obsessed by the Second World War. So I was very knowledgeable, still am very knowledgeable about the Second World War. I'd studied it, in depth, and on both sides, and not just looking at one side of, hey, we're the heroes, we had the flag and we won. No, it's also looking at all the sides of that thing, and how did we let it happen?
Sure.
How did who financed Hitler? And you know the answers to those questions, don't you?
Maybe. I don't know if we want to go down this rabbit hole, but
okay,
yes, I do.
No. Guide me elsewhere if you wish.
I do, actually.
That's no problem at all. Let's get back to music with great pleasure. I was
gonna ask you. Now, Lemmy had a penchant for having nicknames for everyone. So, is it Lucas Fox? Or you go by Lucas, Luke, Mr. Fox, Foxy? What?
Lemmy was one of the only people in my life who actually gave me a nickname, which was Lou.
Lou, okay.
And
but you go by Lucas.
Lucas Fox is my name, and that's what everybody knows me as. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
There's occasionally girlfriends and stuff go Foxy, but it doesn't last long.
Right.
I'm Lucas. I'm Lucas, and I'm Lucas Fox.
Right. But he did call you Lou for that. That was his nickname for you, was Lou.
Oh yeah. Right until the end. Right until we spent 2.5 hours together. I don't know if you can see behind me, but over there is a backstage pass. Can you see that in the mirror?
I see it. Yep.
Okay, that's the 18th of the 11th, 2014. The last time we were together, and we spent 2.5 hours together.
In the liner notes. Yep.
Right. Right. And so that was a beautiful meeting, and it was just like we were back in 40 something years ago. And we were talking
because a lot of viewers don't realize that. I mean, you were an integral part of the formation of the band, the very beginning, and you helped Lemmy, come up with these ideas and basically come up with the concept with the band and the image, etc. You talk about how you contributed to coming up with the idea for the umlaut and all that stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, the umlaut. Yeah, I mean, the little dots on the O's was
Yeah.
the classic funny one, because you know, Lemmy being Lemmy would sort of go, oh, I want it on the first low. You know, it needs to be on the first low. And I said, no. Lemmy, I did 7 years German at school. If you want the whole of the Germanic people worldwide, the Austrians, the Germans, you know, all the people who speak German, to say Motörhead instead of Motörhead, well, go ahead, you know. And it went on like this. I think it was about 3 days worth, until finally, I'd been to art school as well. Finally, I got out my calligraphy style thing and just wrote it in Germanic script, in Gothic script, and bung those umlauts on the second O as it had to be, and pushed it across. I said, look, there it is. And he went, oh, all right, fair enough, and laughed, and we moved on. But yes, and of course the imagery and
oh, so you kind of came up with the logo too, the Motörhead logo?
No, not the snaggletooth. No,
not the mascot, but the way that Motörhead is written in that kind of classical style.
Gothic script. Well,
yeah,
Gothic script. Gothic script. I mean, I did 7 years German, so I was used to Gothic script, and I went to art school and did calligraphy. Therefore, I did Gothic script. So, so who knows? I don't not into credit taking or giving or whatever. When you're in a band, you're in a band, you just put everything in you've got, and that's what I do. Sure. That's what, you know, that's why I live. You know, I put everything in I can, and then people can talk about it afterwards until they're blue in the face. That's fine. It doesn't bother me.
Right.
But yes, I mean, but yes, we saw eye to eye.
I love history, so I love to kind of get to the nuts and bolts of of music history and how things started, and just like that the light bulb, or that light bulb moment, or that kind of stuff. So
well, you read the liner notes a bit, so you know that that it hadn't really crossed Lemmy's mind to form his own band.
Oh yeah,
because he was happy in Hawkwind, you know.
Yeah, in fact, let me just show it. I have it right here. I'm just going to show it to the viewers here, just to give them a little glimpse of it. And we can talk about it a little bit more, but I just wanted them to take a look at it. It's amazing, by the way. I love it.
And is that the re-release or the original skull?
This is the 2020 re-release.
Expanded, super duper remastered.
Yeah, with bonus tracks with Lucas on a lot of tracks that were never released. So
and also the thing which might surprise one or two, it certainly surprised me in a way as well, is I hadn't really thought about it, because I hadn't listened to it for years and years, and so I asked Warner Brothers to send me, you know, the remastered versions. And they sent it to me, and I started listening to the tracks with Doug Smith as well. Doug Smith, the manager at the time, he was listening to them where he was in Spain. And I said, Doug, do you hear what I hear? And he said, what's that? And I said, listen to the snare drum. It goes bing. It's got what Larry used to call a clune, which is my individual. I have a snare drum here, even now, which when you hit it, it's still got that ring to it. I don't deaden it off. It's not a clack, you know, snare, because clack. It's got a little overtone, which I really like, and Dave Edmunds loved, because it meant that in playing, he could use that to cut through the bass and guitar. So he needed less volume on the snare drum, making the guitar and the bass louder sounding, because the snare's still there cutting through, because it's got this little overtone. So when you listen to these tracks, all the tracks that were overdubbed by Phil, you still hear the original drums on them.
Really?
Therefore, there are two drummers on those tracks.
That's neat. I'm going to have to listen to that.
Not one, you see. And it's particularly evident in early verses. And of course, Phil when he went in and overdubbed on my kit, he used my kit and my cymbals, and he replaced my snare drum. So
Yeah,
I can hear them. I can hear the moment when Phil's overdub comes in with
and
his
you
snare
guys
drum
met,
over
and
my snare drum.
it was pretty amicable. You guys were, everything was very friendly, the whole situation about him coming in. Well,
No,
no,
no, it
okay.
wasn't. No, it wasn't. I had no idea it was going on for a
Okay.
start. It was done behind my back, and
Hmm.
that's the way it goes. Life is life. But
It's rock and roll, right?
I love what Filthy did, and he invented a sound which works so well for Motörhead. That's great. But if you listen to the bootlegs of the Hammersmith Odeon and the Roundhouse, you'll hear more of what was happening live on that 18-date tour. It's an 18-date tour that we roared round England on before going into the studio to record at Rockfield. And if you listen to those two bootlegs, which aren't very good quality, but you can hear what's going on, you hear that the drum style is more linked to, I don't know, Ainsley Dunbar or Mitch Mitchell or whatever than Charlie or Ringo. It's lots of toms going on. So when I went into the studio, the sulfate. Can I talk seriously on this show? I don't know what we can talk about. I'm not going to say too much because But the sulfate was so strong when we got into the studio, and we just done 18-date tour over 3 weeks or something, and the sulfate was so incredibly strong that I thought I better play safe. So I played straight down the line, more Charlie and Ringo style, through the tracks. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to overdub over my drums. They would have had to re-record the whole thing if my drums weren't solid and straight down the line on the beat. Right? Logical. Mm-hmm. My dear Watson,
right?
You understand what I'm saying? If the drums had been all over the place, they'd have had to re-record the whole track, yes?
Right.
Because it would speed up, slow down, stuff like that. But it didn't.
Gotcha.
Straight down the line. But the thing about it is, think about the recording techniques at the time. There wasn't a drum booth. There were overhead mics going down the studio to get that big Dave Edmunds sound. Therefore, everything was recorded through those mics. Guitar, bass, guide vocal, drums. Therefore, if you want to slide down the mics on the drum kit, you're going to slide down a part of the bass and a part of the guitar at the same time. Therefore, what they did was they overdubbed Phil's kit onto the overall sound. Therefore, you can hear in the overall sound the ambient mics, which picked up the original drum kit. That's why you've got two drummers on the recording. It's not like they wiped the original drum kit, because they couldn't. It was on all the tracks.
So
the
let
overheads,
me ask you, is that...
You see what I'm saying?
Have...
I was talking technically. There was no complete separation. It's not like these days where you have a drum booth, you have a guitar booth, a bass booth.
Right.
And you can take anything out and it's complete separation. That's not the way this was recorded.
Well, almost in a live way, right?
Almost a live situation, absolutely.
Right. So
That's
as far as this album goes, is when it comes to like the studio stuff, is there a whole album's worth of a recording session, or is this basically it as far as your work with Motörhead? Or is there more? Is there possibly more out there?
I think that's possibly it.
Okay.
But I must admit that we're going back 46 years now. and 46 years for 4 or 5 days of recording sessions. Pretty much tanked up and using incredibly strong amphetamine sulfate. And therefore, going into the memory banks to how many tracks did we record?
Right. Well, it's a miracle. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing that we have this. So I'm just pleased to just as a historical document, as the beginning, the genesis of Motörhead. It's really amazing to have. I'm super excited to have it, to analyze it, to listen to it. And you were going to talk about how when Lemmy came back from Hawkwind, he was completely dejected after getting, kicked out of the band, and how, as a good friend, you lifted him up, and you were right by his side, and you basically were his better angels, talking to him about, giving him inspiration. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Of course, with great pleasure. I mean, well, for a start, Lemmy was a lot older than I am, right? He was, I was 21 when we met, and he was 28, I think. And at the time, a 21-year-old, 28-year-old who's been Jimi Hendrix's roadie and acid dealer,
right?
and spent the last 4 years in Hawkwind,
right?
Taking
Rocking
acid,
Vickers,
smoking dope, Rocking Vickers, Sam Gopal,
yeah,
and all that stuff.
Legit rock star.
And yeah, I've been drumming since the age of 9. I started washing cars at the age of 9 to buy my drum kits because my parents didn't have much money. And and then pretty much playing in bands from the age of 13 onwards, and then in professional bands from the age of 17, just after art school. I spent 6 months in an art school doing calligraphy and all the other stuff I said earlier. And so then being in bands, and I don't know, the first really professional band about the age of 20, I'd say. And WHPS band was actually produced by Pink Floyd.
Oh, wow.
Nick Mason and Roger Waters. So that was 3 years before I was in Motörhead. And then there was
is that ever going to surface? Stuff.
I wouldn't have thought so. It sounded like a sub Pink Floyd. It was a really good R&B band, good pub rock band, and it ended up sounding like sub Pink Floyd. It was the week that Dark Side of the Moon went to the top of the American charts, so they became millionaires overnight.
Right.
And we didn't really have a penny, as often the way. And that's of course why Lemmy's called Lemmy. Is Lemmy a quid till Friday. I mean, these are realities of the Ladbroke Grove scene at the time. Of we're not talking about little rich kids who had loads of money in their back pocket and drove around in their papa's Cadillacs and stuff. It's not. It wasn't quite like that. And so yeah, and then on, I was in bands playing Air Force, RAF bases with Vulcan bombers and stuff. And then on to Rostag, which was a glam rock band. That was fun. And that was in the middle of glam rock and stuff. And that was up until when I met Lemmy, so it's about 74. And I was playing in lots of one-off gigs and one-off recording sessions and stuff like that. When Lemmy and I started hanging out together, we met at the Speakeasy.
And you guys hit it off
wonderful
quick.
Club. Immediately, absolutely immediately. It started with our sense of humour. Tommy Cooper, love Tommy Cooper, Goon Show, and all the people that you'll know better, which is Monty Python, of course.
Monty Python guys, sure.
And we were exchanging sketches immediately, about the Four Yorkshiremen and Lick Road, Clean Whittongue and stuff. Immediately we were pissing ourselves laughing and joking, and then suddenly we were locked into talking about music. And I was really gobsmacked to hear a guy in a progressive rock band, space rock band, talking about his favorite music being MC5 and the Stooges and the English Birds with Ronnie Wood and
I have one of those. I have that right here.
Wheels. Well, there you are. Kick out the jams, absolutely. And when I first went back to his place, I think the second night we were together. First night I dropped him home. I think the second night we were together. First thing he put on was Back in the USA. There you go. Oh, that's right. And of course, the English Birds. There you go. What a great album. Absolutely. And of course the early Beatles, which of course I'd been following as much as he had, and I met them. I spent a day with the Beatles when I was 12, completely by accident, on the film set of Help. I spent a whole day with them. So there were an awful lot of
Wow.
things which we had in common, and also a lot of things which we just hit it off really deep inside. And every time he wasn't on tour, he was on tour a lot in '74 and recording. Anytime he wasn't, he called me up because, you know, we'd hang out together and drive around together and go you know, score speed together and go and hang out with Mickey Farron, you know, who's the journalist, and Joy Farron, his wife, who I knew really well as well, and all the Ladbroke Grove scene. You know, I've been in Ladbroke Grove for a while as well. Ladbroke Grove,
Was that the
Road.
Deviants were part of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Deviants, yeah, you bet. And of course, Deviants
one right here.
with Wayne Kramer, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. With Mickey there. Yeah, absolutely. Bless him, bless Mickey. Yeah. And of course, and then that all, you know, it's all that genealogy about Ladbroke Grove of, you know, the Deviants then also had Andy Colquhoun, and Andy Colquhoun was in the Warsaw Pact. I was in the Warsaw Pact with Andy Colquhoun and John Manley. John Manley was living with Paul Rudolph. Paul Rudolph replaced Lemmy on bass when he got thrown out of Hawkwind, you know, and got called Blackie, and he was flown out to Canada to take over from Lemmy on that fatal tour when he was kicked out of Hawkwind. And then there's Alan Davey, and Alan Davey was the person who was who played bass and sang in Hawkwind for 20 years after Lemmy. And Alan Davey, me and Paul Rudolph play on the Pink Fairies album, which you've obviously got as well, haven't you?
Somewhere.
Well, here we go. You know, I mean, which Pink Fairies album are we talking about? We should be talking about. Oop, hang on. You there?
Yeah.
Resident
All
Reptiles.
right.
Okay, with Paul Rudolph, Alan Davey, Lucas Fox.
Very good.
Therefore, Paul Rudolph, original from the Pink Fairies, who replaced Lemmy on bass in Hawkwind in that tour. Alan Davey.
I love Alan Davey. I actually collaborated with him on recently on a book. I'll be talking about that later. But so that I've actually met, well, via email and such. I collaborated with him on a book. So it's a very, very cool guy.
Oh, yes. And of course, Alan and Paul and I hit it off immediately because we had so much in common. Paul, you know, Alan and I had Lemmy in common because Alan met Lemmy when he was 22 and hung out with him and started hanging out with him. And it's exactly pretty much the same parallel story as me and Lem.
Well, he had that. He was in that band, that band Gunslinger.
Afterwards, yeah. Still is kind of, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And then, of course, you got the Warsaw Pact. Of course, you got the Warsaw Pact.
Right.
Where you got John Manley, Andy Colquhoun, who was then in the Deviants and Tans the Youth, you know, and me, of course, on drums, you know. So round it goes. This is the Ladbroke Grove scene.
Awesome.
Alan Davey wasn't part of the Ladbroke Grove scene, but Paul Rudolph certainly was, and Pink Fairies obviously had Larry Wallace in them. who then, of course, a few weeks after Lem got thrown out, and a few weeks after Lemmy and I started Motörhead, we started looking around for a guitarist and found Larry Wallace.
Right.
Larry Wallace, and started coming and playing with us, and off we went. You know, and that's how the whole thing kicked off.
Well, that's awesome. So when it came to, so in the very beginning, you, like I said, when he got kicked out of Hawkwind, you kind of convinced him to, you know, why don't you start your own band? We can do this thing. And so you kind of maybe gave him the advice, or the, I don't, you know, the strength.
It was a two-pronged attack. I got pissed off with him, basically, because I'd never seen Lemmy this negative for a start. Lemmy was a car crash, bless him. You know, I mean, like anybody, like I was at the end of Motörhead, you know, when these sorts of things happen to you, although it's extremely common in the rock and roll world,
Sure.
It kind of destroys you, at least temporarily. And so he was mightily pissed off and very upset. And he'd been very happy in Hawkwind. It was for 4 years. I mean, it was the most successful thing he'd ever done in his life for a start, Hawkwind. And even though he lived a completely different lifestyle to the rest of the band, I mean, he was up all night on speed, and they were all, you know, like smoking dope and being laid back, and you know,
Right.
space junkies,
Right.
and so he was living on another planet from them, and so, I mean, Doug Smith's office would ring me up regularly in '74 and early '75 saying, have you seen Lemmy? And I go, well, yes, I left him about 4 o'clock this morning. Where was he? And I said, well, I dropped him off in Portobello Road. I don't know where he's going. Oh, fuck. He's meant to be on tour, you know? And,
He's supposed to be on tour.
you know, and nobody could find Lemmy because he'd been up too many nights and he'd fallen asleep somewhere.
Right.
And they had to go and try and find him somewhere. You know, every now and then he'd be asleep on my couch or you know, in a bed at my house. Or whatever, you know, or he'd wait, you know, whatever. But it wasn't like we had mobile phones in those days. So Hawkwind did get pretty pissed off with him as well, because he was living on a different time zone to Hawkwind. And it also the jealousy factor. You know, I mean, the jealousy factor. When he was the only person who could sing Silver Machine. And suddenly Silver Machine became the big hit for Hawkwind.
It was,
in
their biggest hit.
1972, their biggest hit, and Lemmy was singing on it. And it's the first time that Lemmy'd sung in Hawkwind. And suddenly Lemmy was projected into the spotlight as being the leader of Hawkwind.
Right.
Which created a little bit of jealousy in the other boys.
Mm-hmm.
And so that as usual, these sort of, you know, these macho alpha males need all this stuff, you see. So
Right.
So it wasn't a complete surprise to me that this happened, but it was to him. It was to Lem, bless him. And so yeah, when I picked him up from the airport, he wasn't in a good mood at all, to put it mildly. And then we had about 10 days together where he didn't really want to see anybody. And he was mightily pissed off. And then, of course, he hatched the plot to seduce 4 of the Hawkwind wives before they came back off tour, which he managed to do, which cheered him up no end. He became a different Lem. He suddenly appeared with a big grin on his face.
God love Lemmy, man.
Yeah. Well, this cheered him up no end, and but he still wanted to get back in the band. He still wanted Doug Smith to convince the band to take him back, and Doug Smith on his side was, and me on my side, I was going, "Oh, Lem, for fuck's sake, come and stop it!" You know, I'm a drummer, you're a bass player, you got all this reputation, you got Silver Machine, you got all these fans. Why don't we just start something, you know, start a band, let's start a band. Oh, no, man, you know, and I could kind of understand why he didn't want to start a band. When you look at all the characters in Hawkwind, much as I love them, you know, I mean, Simon King and Nick Turner and Dave Brock, Alan Powell, you know, yeah, but I mean, Stacia, love Stacia, but I mean, difficult characters, you know, there's a whole band of difficult characters, and managing or running a band as your band with a bunch of characters like that is not it's not a bowl of cherries, you know, it's not easy. So right. I could fully understand why anybody wouldn't necessarily want to start his own band when he looked at his experience of bands, you know. Right. So anyway, Doug, every Friday when Lemmy went and picked up his wages, so those 1, 2, I think it's 3 Fridays, was having a go at Lemmy on his side, saying, Lemmy, this is the golden opportunity, you know, I can get you a record deal, you know, we can do this, you know, just get yourself a drummer, get yourself a guitarist or 2, and we can do this. This can work. And sure enough.
Well, music-wise, you guys kind of had an idea of because you were talking about the Stooges, the Detroit high-energy rock, you know, bands, Stooges, MC5, and then there was also like the underground bands from, you know, the UK scene, like the Deviants and Edgar Broughton Band and all those bands as well.
And the Birds,
And
absolutely,
the
the
Birds.
Birds, and them, you know, Van
Them.
Morrison's band, them, and the Pretty Things,
Oh
and of
yeah.
course early Beatles. You're talking about whole groundswell. I mean, you know, how did MC5 come about? Well, partly because Stones, Beatles, Kinks, Who, the wildness of the Who, excuse me, sounds
Right.
familiar? Way before MC5 was even a twinkle in somebody's eye, there was the Who. It's like 62, 63, you know. So you're talking about re-spitting out your influence in each way, you know, spitting out, you know, one lot of influences. You know, the Beatles, the Stones are very influenced by American sound, and they ingurgitated that and spat it out as their own version, a different British version of, and re-exported that back into the States. And then you got the American Birds, who are very close to the Beatles, of course, getting influenced by the Beatles by the Birds, and all, you know, the whole, you know, synergy between them, which is fabulous, you know, you know, and then of course, you know, the whole, it's the short, sharp shock idea, and of course, let us not forget that in 1974, early 75, MC5, the Stooges, and the Flaming Groovies were not very well known anywhere.
Well, yeah, you guys were kind of, the Motorhead basically essentially became the missing link between those bands and what was emerging in the late 70s with the punk and the new wave of British heavy metal, and then even in the early 80s with the thrash movement with Metallica. So Motorhead,
yes, it's kind of bridge, isn't it? It's kind of bridge.
Yeah, they were the missing link between all of that. They bridged the gap between all of those bands. So
and if you listen to On Parole, this album, this one that you've got there, it really is that bridge between progressive rock and what came after, when Filthy and Eddie came in. And Filthy and Eddie then took the flame, thank God, onto the next stage, and that became metal and all the rest of it. And this is 4 or 5 months before punk when we recorded that. We recorded in October, November 75. 5 months, 6 months later, it's McLaren, Vivienne Westwood suddenly picking up on what kind of imagery? Swastikas,
swastikas,
you know, skulls. You know, suddenly we've got skulls appearing all over the place.
Very anti-establishment
style, anti-establishment, shocking the establishment. You know, rebellious against the establishment. Does that ring a bell from Motorhead? You know, who else was doing it at the time? It wasn't the same as the hippie movement or the 1960s anti-establishment. It was slightly different to that. They'd been the flag bearers, but in many ways, we're talking about 1973, the oil crash, right? The oil crash, politically, worldwide, suddenly oil. You remember the 1973 oil crash? Affected the States as well.
I wasn't around, but I'm aware of it.
A little bit.
Okay. Well, Britain was on a 4-day week. We every day we had 4 hours of no electricity in all the offices.
Oh wow!
Yeah. Every afternoon, my father had a little office. Golf ball typewriters were electric; they plugged in the wall. And fortunately, he hadn't thrown away all his old typewriters, so he brought all the old typewriters with carbon paper up from the basement, and he could still function by candlelight.
He could still,
no light.
Yeah,
with his secretaries and his assistants typing on old school typewriters with carbon paper and sending carbon paper by bike messenger, a guy on a bicycle. You know, something. This, you know, imagine if that happened now with no internet. Ooh, suddenly, you know, the whole world that you know.
You have to live like a caveman again.
No. You just get back into it, just like Uber.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, I mean, a lot of young kids think that.
But the guys delivering your sandwiches by bicycle is the way it would go again, because we'd be passing messages by them to actual addresses, physical addresses. You know, it would go back to that, and it might happen because the internet crash is something that could happen, and people forget this. We've just been reminded of this with this wonderful, enormous hack that happened last week. You know, that suddenly came to light that. You know,
the gas hack in the U.S.
Absolutely, and suddenly we realised how vulnerable we are again. You know,
Sure.
but this has always been. You see, so these things are all kind of linked into the sort of psyche that I had and Lemmy had. So in 1973, you got an oil crash, and you've also got massive unemployment coming up. And therefore, this is the first time since the late 50s you've got unemployment at all in Europe, because we're rebuilding Europe. We've got immigration coming in from all over, from the ex-colonies, to rebuild Britain, and likewise to rebuild Europe, because it's all bombed out. Therefore, we got people coming in, and we got full employment, and money is like circulating. Therefore, everybody's got a little bit of money, and people can buy records. Records were made of vinyl. Vinyl was made of petrol. In 1973, the price of vinyl doubled.
Okay, that makes total sense.
Suddenly, all those wonderful gatefold sleeves that we love, they couldn't afford to do it anymore. So suddenly you got back to what we're looking at now, which is just a basic, simple 1960s style sleeve.
Right.
Not the big double fold out, expansive, you know, all these enormous profits in the record business. The bottom fell out of the record business for the first time in 1973-74, just like it has with internet. Internet took the bottom out of the record business because suddenly a whole generation were told that music could be free, which of course it isn't.
Right.
Because otherwise you don't pay any musicians, you don't pay any record companies, which is what the problem that we got at the moment with Spotify and Deezer and iTunes and all the rest of it. They aren't paying what they should be paying. The record companies should have, you know, done a decent arm wrestle and be getting decent money, because otherwise, how the fuck can musicians just survive off living on the road, particularly when there's a pandemic and there's no road?
Right.
Right. So there we have massive unemployment and a disconnect between so many of these kids with all these bands that are living in manors. They're taking 5 or 6 months to do an album, and driving around in Rolls Royces and Bentleys, and living in Mustique and Jamaica. And these kids have got nothing. They got no employment. They got no future. And Lemmy, me, Larry, we're talking to those kids because they could identify with us, because we weren't coming from this superstar land. We were coming from 2 bands, which Pink Fairies and Hawkwind, which are seriously independent, seriously anti-establishment already. And
they were almost commune bands in a way, right? Like communal bands, essentially.
Yeah, very much so. And with all the craziness that went with it. I mean, they did alternative free festival gigs, not being paid and stuff, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's right. So these kids could at least identify with them more than the Yes, Genesis. You know, all those bands are wonderful, of course.
So going back to you guys being like a missing link is because a lot of those there were people, you know, that the punks could identify with you, the rockers could identify with you guys, the metalhead guys could identify with, you know, so everyone that. Once again, going back to the missing link, is like everyone could, in some way, could identify with Motörhead.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that first tour, of course. Well, you said metalheads. Of course, there weren't any metalheads.
Right. Sure. Later on.
They came afterwards. I mean, I can remember the first few dates, the Twickenham Roundhouse, Twickenham Winning Post. It was full of Hawkwind and Pink Fairies fans. And they, you know, as soon as we came on and started playing, a whole sea of faces with their mouths open.
Oh, because they wanted space rock.
Well, no, well, they were used to hearing some of the tracks we were playing, but in a much slower. We were playing short shock 3.5, 4 minute songs instead of, you know, 10-minute songs with 20-minute guitar solos in each of them.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, and it was very effective. And then we wouldn't leave them enough time to even applaud before we hammered them with another one and another one and another one. And that was the way we did it. And that's what Lemmy wanted to do. And I adhered to this completely because I thought this was a great idea. It's great fun. And so we roared around the country, and within 3 or 4 gigs, suddenly people were turning up with leather jackets. Suddenly people were turning up with mirror shades and white cowboy boots, which they weren't in fashion at all at the time. Suddenly bullet belts, you know, they'd been down the surplus store and they got bullet belts. Suddenly they were covered in rings, patches and stuff. You know, suddenly we were seeing the imagery that Lemmy and I had talked about for months before he got kicked out of Hawkwind. We were talking about, well, you know, really like this imagery and that imagery and the design of the SS uniforms. Yes, we hate the SS, but God, the design was good. Hugo Boss did a great design job there.
Right.
You know, and you know, the tanks, you know, the Tiger and the Panther tanks, both designed by Ferdinand Porsche, who makes Porsche sports cars. You know, I mean, of course, and you didn't want to go there, but who was the person who financed Hitler? It was Henry Ford, who was a noted anti-Semitic. You know, he was the person who financed Hitler the most. You know, because he didn't want the Bolsheviks. You know, so it's all linked. You know, it's all linked. Right. And the anti-establishment position of Lem and I. However much Lem and I will always go, we are apolitical. In some strange way, you cannot be apolitical and live in this world because there's a moment in time, every time
you have to pick a side.
Like, you got to. Well, in the end, you cannot just keep agreeing with things because you can see where it leads. You can see what's happened in history since the Romans. If you don't stand up to tyranny just keeps going. It loves it. It loves itself. It feasts on itself.
Well, I was going to ask you something. You brought up the tour. So it was a mini tour that you guys did, and I was going to surprise you, but it seems to me like you're already familiar with this. But I do have right here. My friend he bootlegs. He trades, you know, bootlegs.
Good for him.
My friend, and I'm a massive Motörhead fan. He's like, and now I only got this a couple years ago. It's October 1975 at Hammersmith Odeon.
Absolutely.
So
Blue Oyster
you're
Cult.
on this. This is
of course. Yeah.
So what I was going to ask is there a possibility that this could be digitally cleaned up, an official release? Could that ever be a possibility down the road? I mean, it's amazing. As Motörhead,
I'd love it to be.
I was gonna. The set list is really unique and is amazing. It's the very beginning. It's the genesis of the band. The whole sound is formulating, being created at that time. I mean, there's Motörhead, Lost Johnny, Silver Machine, City Kids, Waiting for the Man, Leaving Here, and Johnny Be Good. So it's a very unique set list. I mean, you know.
Well, that's the set list, and I tell you what, that was what we started off with in those first rehearsals in Battersea in South London.
Okay.
Where in fact the first rehearsal, Larry didn't actually turn up. It was just me and Lemmy, the first rehearsal that Motörhead ever had. It was me and Lemmy because Larry didn't turn up. But yes, the second rehearsal, we started working on those tracks. And those 10 days of rehearsals, I think it was just 10 days to start the band off before we went on tour, were those tracks. That was our set list.
So is there a possibility that that could be officially released somehow? Has anyone reached out to you about that?
No, but I personally would have nothing against that. On the contrary, I'd love that to happen. I know recording techniques as they are today, even going from a horrendous cassette that must have been, I'm sure it would be possible to clean it up and make a great remastering of it.
Sure.
Then of course it needs to go through the official Motörhead channels of the Motörhead management and stuff, which I can't speak for. That's not I'm not part of, But if it's my opinion,
you can bend their ear a little bit maybe and say, hey, this thing's out.
Well, it's possible I might be able to, because you must have heard that there's going to be a biopic. Which you heard there's going to be
I thought you might heard that you were writing a book.
I'm writing a book. Absolutely. Okay. I'm writing a book which a good part of the book will be me and Lem, and then spinning back into my childhood and how it is that somebody who is so unlikely or unlike so many of so many musicians were different from the norm anyway. But no, I wasn't a typical, what you'd say, candidate for a band that ended up in being Motörhead. Right. I'm not the bilingual, bicultural, riding horses, etc. Although Lemmy rode horses, he was extremely learned. He would read all the time. He was much more intelligent than most people give him credit, and much more learned than most people give him credit, and much more politically aware, although he would not go down that route, and I'm not really going down that route either. As you can notice, I'm skirting around it because I don't believe you can avoid it completely, but I'm not either going down a route of telling anybody what to think, because they must think what they think. It's that's everybody's right, and everybody must do what they must do. So I'm not going down that route, but read between the lines, watch my lips. At our peril, we forget our history. And that, I think nobody would deny on the Lemmy front anyway. So yes, I'd love that to happen, because I believe that there is a legacy here. There is a legacy to how this band started. I was just so gobsmacked. A lot of people have asked me, how did you feel when in 1979 it finally came out? And my immediate reaction always is, thank fuck for that. I'm so pleased, because Lem and I put so much into the starting of this band, and it was so hard. It was so difficult, and it was a real breech birth. It wasn't easy. Lem didn't really want to go down. Right. Well, wow. Lem didn't really, Lem didn't really want to go down that route.
That's an intense imagery. I can see that in my head.
but we got there, and we managed to make that little devil sit up and beg, and then when Filthy came in, and then when Eddie came in, and you got this fucking amazing threesome, which I was gobsmacked. You've read the liner notes. It was that moment when the guy in the dressing room on the 18th of November 2014, who came up to me and said, "Lucas, Lemmy knows you're here, and we're really grateful, and we all know you're here," and all that. He turned to go away and came back and grabbed my hand again, and grabbed it with both hands. He said, "You do realize that nobody would be in this concert hall tonight if you hadn't been there for Lemmy in '75. There would be no Motörhead, and everybody here knows that." And it had never crossed my mind.
It's true.
I mean, I knew that this 22-year-old kid, which I was, had been important to Lem. And God knows I'm one of these people who is doggedly faithful and stands by. I'll stand by my man, because he's the man. He's my big brother. He's my uncle. He's my my mate, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you know, I'm going to stand by him and until I get kicked out, which is what happened.
Well, everything
to him,
has to
happened
start
me.
somewhere. I mean, it was the kernel. It was the beginning.
That's right. And we grew that baby out of reference books that I'd collected since I was 11 or 12, that both of us pored over, looking for bits of imagery and style and thinking, you know. I mean, in that time, that, you know, in 75, May, June, July 75, we worked our way through that. And when Joe Patagno, you know, after the I think it was a Twickenham winning post, Joe Patagno came to, Doug Smith asked him down to have a look at the band and think about doing a logo. And just after that, there was a few days off or something, and Lem and I are sitting on the sofa in Doug Smith's office, Doug Smith, the manager's office, on his leather sofa, and between us we got Joe Patagno. And Joe Patagno gets out this big craft, you know, brown envelope, and pulls out 2 sketches and puts them on the table, on the coffee table in front of us. And then he goes, that one, straight away. his finger comes out straight, that one, but make it dirtier. I want some dribble coming out.
The warboard?
Yes, Snaggletooth, yeah.
Snaggletooth.
Snaggletooth, which some people call War Pig, which I'm a bit strange about, because War Pig is in fact, as far as I can remember, a Black Sabbath song, but that's okay.
Right.
Each to his own, each to his own. As far as I'm concerned, it's Snaggletooth. And and I was there with Lemmy and Doug Smith, with Joe Patagno, and we were the first people to see Snaggletooth come out of the brown envelope. And then Lemmy wanted spikes on the top of the head, and he wanted an iron cross hanging off one of the tusks, and dribble like the dribble from Alien. You remember the film Alien?
Yeah.
With the monster with the saliva dribbling from his mouth. So he wanted it to be much nastier, which is great, you know. So that kind of fitted with that was the image of the music. Yeah, that was the image of the music which we were going for. Mixed with, of course, you know, the SS imagery, the iron crosses, and all that stuff, and staunchly anti-fascist. You know, I mean, absolutely not into, you know.
It was all about shock value, anti-establishment, rocking the boat.
And absolutely, but also about both of ours obsessions with the Second World War, and interest, fascination with the pervitine driven, you know, pervitine, the amphetamine that the Nazis used.
Oh, yep, I've heard of that. Yeah.
Okay, the Nazis used a thing called pervitine, which is amphetamine, is methamphetamine.
To keep the soldiers going.
To keep the soldiers going, and they tried it out in the Spanish Civil War first of all, and then it worked so well in the Spanish Civil War, and it worked so well on the women, which is where it started. It was actually available in chemists for women to lose weight and be more joyous. And then they tried it out on the pilots in the Spanish Civil War, and then they started using it on their troops, and particularly their crack divisions, their elite divisions, and their Panzer divisions, and their pilots. And then it went on to the submarines. Submarines could work longer hours, and then they had the women and the men working in factories on pervitine. So by the end of the war, you got pretty
an army
much
full of junkies.
No, the whole of Nazi Germany full of junkies. Pervitine. And when the Beatles went over to Hamburg, at the end of the 50s, early 60s, the audience they were playing to were on pervitine, and the Beatles took pervitine. Just the same as Keith Moon was dealing Benzedrine, English speed, to the other members of the Who. Just the same as all the bands that were playing 2 or 3 gigs a night in the 60s.
Oh yeah.
All the British R&B bands up and down the country, going up and down the M1 and you know, crisscrossing the country, playing 2 or 3 gigs a night. They were on speed as well. So this speed thing kind of kept going from all the way through from the Second World War straight into the the youngsters doing these gigs. So there's lots of these parallel lines. Lemmy thought sleep was a waste of time, basically. Now, I can't agree with that because I love my sleep, and I find that sleep brings you so many more ideas. But I mean, again, these wonderful myths around this stuff, Miss and Mrs. but yeah, I mean, Lemmy and I didn't eat a lot, and we didn't sleep a lot when we were together. So
I was going to say, you were talking about how, like, when it eventually came out. Now, a lot of people, the viewers might know or not know, but a lot of people didn't. You just recently kind of re-emerged with the new Pink Fairies album. Did and Alan Davey kind of coax you out of retirement? Because I saw your video on the Classic Rock website. I was looking at some article and you popped up, and I was like, because you jokingly, the running joke is, everyone thinks you're dead. No one knew that you were alive, essentially.
Well, girlfriends who I've met over the years have talked to their girlfriends and sort of saying, "Oh, I hooked up with this great geezer the other day, and he's really nice and a sweet gentleman and stuff." And oh yeah, and he was the first drummer in Motörhead. Is he still alive? That's always the first question. And the second question is he deaf?
Is he deaf?
But yeah, but I mean, I just spent the whole. I mean, this. The night before I went to saw Lemmy the last time, I thought, I'm going to just look at the date sheet of all the gigs that I didn't play. So it's like 39 years of gigs or something. I read through the whole thing on the official Motörhead website, every single gig. And of course, it's very repetitive. It's 18 months tours by 18 months tours by 18 months tours. And I thought, I've done so much with my life of, running shows myself, programming shows, running shows in New York, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, running the Medem shows, the biggest music convention in the world. All sorts of doing music for film as music supervisor. Yes, playing drums, producing Gothic bands, working with the Sisters of Mercy, working with Sisterhood.
Oh, nice.
Working with Wedding Anniversary. The Austrian Gothic band, Ekaterina Velika, the biggest Gothic band and biggest rock band that Yugoslavia had before the wall came down. I worked with all these people. Fantastic. Just after Motörhead, I was in a band after Warsaw Pact, where we did the fastest album ever, which was a fucking great experience at Trident Studios, direct to disc. To disc. We did the mix, we set up the mix and recorded the whole damn thing direct to disc. We recorded side A, then we recorded side B. And that was then driven off to the factory to have the lacquer, the mother made, which is the thing that prints the discs. And then it was driven illegally by a sports car across the country to the factory. And they pressed 5,000 records in the night. And that same morning, we were signing records. We made all those covers individually ourselves, stamping and putting stickers on them. Nothing existed.
What band was that?
Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact.
Okay.
It's on YouTube. There's 6 or 7 of the recordings of that. And so if you like, as far as I'm concerned, after Warsaw Pact, then I was in Carl Grossman's White Lightning. Carl Grossman's White Lightning, we did the demos. We recorded the demos in the basement in what was called Apple Studios, in the basement of you remember that the last gig the Beatles ever played was on the rooftop.
Yeah,
right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
In the basement of that cell, that's Apple building. In the basement of that's Apple HQ. In the basement of that, there was Apple Studios. So we recorded all the demos there, because nobody was allowed to use any of the Beatles studios, because the Beatles John and Paul were in disagreement as to the rights for 10 years. We're in 78, just before they managed to come to an agreement. Therefore, the only people who were allowed to use those studios of any of the Beatles equipment were people who were directly signed to any of the Beatles labels. We were signed to Ringo Records, Ringo's
Or
label.
Apple
Ringo.
Records or...
No, Apple Records or Ringo Records or any of the subsidiary Beatles labels. And so we started in there. Then we went on to Tony Visconti's Good Earth Studios, where Bowie worked, etc., you know, keep going, Tony Visconti. And Tony Visconti sat in on many of those sessions. We had Carlos Alomar playing on some of those sessions. We had Robin and Diva from Stevie Wonder's backing vocalists singing on some of the sessions. Great experience. And I was sat at the back of the control room all the way through 6 weeks of recording, learning about production. Fantastic. Well, you know, pinch me. Here we go for another golden opportunity in life. And from there, we went on to Tittenhurst Park. That was John Lennon's house. So we recorded and mixed at Tittenhurst Park, which was then owned by Ringo Starr. And we walked in there, and as we walked in there, the door opened, front door opened, and just lying against the wall there was John Lennon's 3/4 Rickenbacker. Just like John and Yoko had gone for a walk. In the studio, everything was there. We had the harmoniums that were on, etc. We had access to all this equipment.
Wow,
when we went
incredible.
out on the road and did gigs, we used the Beatles back line Ampeg equipment in white flight cases, which they'd made up in case they were going to do some gigs
once
around
in a
the White
lifetime
Album.
Opportunity, basically.
Incredible. So my life has been completely blessed by all this stuff. It keeps
I was going to
falling
say,
in my lap.
There's a bit of mystery, a bit of mystique around you, you know, your life, and you know, you kind of reemerged, you know, a bit recently, like in the limelight, as it were, because when I first heard about you, I bought it. I was at a show. My friend played his show. Damnation AD opened for this hardcore band. It's called Sick of It All in Connecticut. And this is the early '90s when I was in college. And there was a skinhead there, and he was selling a box set, a Motörhead box set of CDs. And so me and my friend, the guitar player in the band, we went in with the guitar player from Damnation AD, went in with the money. He wanted $25 or something. We both went in on it. We bought it from the skinhead. And so we both kind of shared, you know, we read over the liner notes and all, you know, listened, you know, we were just so excited to have all the music and everything. But one of them is a bonus disc, and it actually came with, when you opened it up, it was like a family tree of Motörhead. Now, this came out in the early '90s, and it had a family tree in it. And at the very top, it says Lemmy, Larry Wallace, and Lucas Fox. And we were like, who in the fuck is Lucas Fox?
That's right.
And there was no internet.
Who's this mystery guy? That's right.
So, yeah, who's this mystery guy? There was no internet. So we had no idea who you were or what happened to you. And, you know, said on parole. But you were a bit of a mystery man for all these years. But I first heard about you from this family tree that came with this box set.
Fabulous.
And so here you are, man. It's quite an honor to be able to. I love Lemmy. I love all of the Motörhead guys. So it's a real honor to be able to be talking to you and hearing these amazing, you know, legendary tales. And yeah, it's just.
Well, it's a real pleasure. But as I say, I've kind of cultivated being in the shade as well, because I've managed to do so much with my life, and so many people. I tell you, the really funny thing, I signed a bunch of copies of On Parole I wanted to give all the photographers who'd helped Motörhead and stuff down the line from the beginning, Ian Dixon, you know, Tony Mottram, etc., Roger Morton. I wanted to send them a signed copy from me. And so Sophie, who's the press attaché for Warner Brothers for France, and we worked together in the States, when I organized a show in Central Park in New York in 91 for the anniversary of the 14th July, which was Bastille Day in the park, okay, the French Revolution. We had 35,000 people at that show for French bands, right? It's the biggest show that France has ever organized, apart from Jean-Michel Jarre. Anyway, Sophie was working as press attaché on that show. She didn't know, I mean, she knew me really well, but I didn't tell anybody about Motörhead.
Mm-hmm.
Why? It's my past, you know, it's nobody's business, none of your beeswax, mate. I'm moving forward. So all my life, I've always moved forward.
Sure.
I've never kind of looked back over my shoulder because I've got nothing to be ashamed of.
Right.
I did what I did. I brought my little stone to the edifice each time, and I've done what I've done.
It's a proud thing to be connected to, though. You know, in hindsight.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I'm delighted that it managed to take off, and it's just done so much good to fans. You know, the Motörhead bangers worldwide, Motörhead World. You know, and so many people have taken courage with just that simple thing, born to lose, live to win. You know, which of course, you know, stems from those early days of all of that unemployment in Britain at the time. You may be a plumber who's out of work. You may be an electrician or mechanic who's out of work. You may be a student who can't afford, you know, tuition, whatever it is, but you can win. And it was that whole principle of being accessible to the fans. And the whole it is a great message. And the basic bit is that Lemmy and I, where I come from, it's old school. Lemmy comes from old school. Again, where we really saw eye to eye again. When you get on stage as a musician, for me, not telling anybody else what to do, I'm there to entertain. I am there to get that audience off. I'm not there to show what I've done in rehearsal or how flash I am or how clever I am. I'm not a fucking performing dog act. I am there to get that audience off. They've paid good money to come into that hall where I'm playing, to get their bums on those seats, to get their asses on those seats. They've paid good money that they've probably fucking worked their ass off in a factory or in some sleazy joint or whatever, maybe even wonderful jobs, whatever it is. But they didn't come here to watch a bunch of guys jerk off on stage and show off how good they are. No, they came to dream and be uplifted. Old-fashioned style, we are entertainment in the best possible way. And therefore, together, the band and the public go higher. And that's what it's about. And if I might make the parallel, it should be the same for men in bed with women.
Sure.
Right? We're not there to jerk off and show how clever we are. We are also there to get the lady off.
Right.
And if we get the audience off, the comeback is so brilliant because the audience is so there. Whereas if we just do our thing and same old show, same night, oh, hi Berlin, no, it's Paris. Oh, yeah, hi Paris, you know. No. You're there for those people in that audience that night. It's special. You should be giving to those people. And if you give wholeheartedly to those people, they will give wholeheartedly to you back. And that's not hippie. That's just what entertainment, the base of entertainment is about, a communal thing that you come together and do together.
Reciprocation, the energy they give you, vice versa.
Absolutely. And that's that fabulous, magical moment where everything becomes bigger than everybody. And that's what it's about.
Are there any particular gigs that stand out that you've played where you've had that amazing energy from the audience?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I mean, funnily enough, the Blue Oyster Cult Hammersmith Odeon, which is a real bastard of the gig because we were sabotaged on our monitors and stuff sound check was, you know, it was horrendous. You know, what we couldn't hear on stage properly and stuff. But the reaction, the relationship between the audience and the band was really something. There was a real interchange. It was electric. Also, the Roundhouse, Barbarella's, Birmingham Barbarella's, the second time we played Birmingham Barbarella's was an incredible magic thing. I can remember Lemmy coming up to me. I can't remember after which song, but he came up to me and leant over my cymbals and said, "Yeah, Lucas, see over there, the guy over there. Listen, he's got his head inside the fucking bass bin. He's banging his head inside the bass bin. He's a fucking Motörhead he's a headbanger." And I said, "A deaf headbanger." And we laughed and went on. Headbanger came from that moment. Wow. I have heard that Led Zeppelin also coined the term earlier, but I have no idea because it didn't become famous. But it was Lemmy talking about that moment at Birmingham Barbarella's, talking about a guy who'd got his head inside a bass bin, banging inside the bass bin, banging his head against
a
it.
headbanger.
And it's a headbanger. And that's where it came from. So the Headbangers Ball and the Motorhead Bangers. And, you know, it was that night at Birmingham Barbarella's that started. So yes, magical moments. I can think of lots of the Warsaw Pact supporting Susie and the Banshees at Oxford University.
Oh, wow.
Was absolutely electric, incredible.
I love her.
Oh, yeah. Susie, what a lovely lady, too. Mm-hmm. You know, a lonely child, a really lonely child. A key latch kid, you know, one of these kids who never really saw her parents when she was a kid. Just let herself in and made her own beans on toast and stuff. A really lonely kid. So again, a bit like many, a real solitary creator. Lemmy was like that too. Lemmy was a real loner, however gregarious and open and generous with his time he was still a complete loner. You know, always had his own book to be able to disappear into. He read all the time. But yes, Susie and the Banshees. And unfortunately, it was also punk year, 77, is you know, the year after the first year of punk. And everybody used to gob in the audience. And through the lights, it was like, have you heard of Azincourt with the English archers?
Right.
Where you see thousands, hundreds of thousands of arrows going through the air.
That meant they loved you, right?
It meant they loved us. And these streams of gob coming at us through the spotlights. And the stage was completely...
You knew you made it big if you got gobbed, right?
Absolutely. And it corroded my cymbals. For fuck's sake, my cymbals had green lines down them. And the stage was really dangerous. The stage was like an ice rink. It was so slippery. With gob, you know, it was horrendous, absolutely horrendous.
Wow.
But you know, yes, we really hit home. Warsaw Pact was a great band live. It was really, you know, it was a hell forever. And the Warsaw Pact album, Needle Time, is, I think, a great album. Very fresh and very raw. I'm gonna have to look into that some more, the Warsaw Pact. If you can imagine that, with really big guitar sounds, because we recorded direct to disc and through, therefore, the cutting lathe, which is a needle. And that needle cost something like $5,000 then, okay? So the engineers were very nervous about blowing the needle. And therefore they played safe on the guitar sounds. I mean, it still sounds raw and energetic, but when you heard that band live, the guitar sounds are really big, and it was a great band. It was great. I loved it. Loved that band. It really hammered. You know, we had a great time touring that. You know. Well, do you have any? I know you're writing a book, and I know that there's a lot of, you know, you don't want to tell everything. There's some secrets in there. But is there one story or one memory you'd like to tell that might not be in the book, or that you haven't really told anyone, or like a special? Or maybe what it was like the last time you saw Lemmy, like maybe a special memory from back in the day, and maybe like when, because you obviously you guys made up over the years. Yeah, you know. Well, funny enough, just after Motörhead, I was then a car crash, a train crash, whatever you want, for a few months, getting over the amphetamines and the ejection, rejection, exactly like he had. And I didn't really have anybody to help me pick me up. But I bounced back because that's part of my psyche and my mentality. Soon after that, I started playing in bands again and getting back onto the drum stool, which was essential to me. And sure enough, every band I played in after that, whether it's the Warsaw Pact, the Untouchables, White Lightning, all those bands, suddenly, guess who's in the audience popped up? Lemmy. Regular as
So
clockwork.
he was always there to, even though, that happened, he moved on essentially. He was always there to pad your back essentially, like.
Oh yeah. He'd pop up. He loved the bands I was in, and he'd pop up, and we'd go for we'd have a drink at the bar and stuff, and it was great. Yeah. And again, we lived in the same area. We lived in Portobello Road. Lemmy was still living in Portobello Road. He didn't move to the States till way later. And so for the first, years, we were living right around the corner from each other. So we'd see each other. We'd see each other down the pub, Henneke's, just like we always did. So he'd be there, his fruit machine and with his Marlboro hanging out his mouth and a, special brew in the other hand and, bunging money into the machine and, oh, what's your loot? All right. Yeah, great. You want a beer? Yeah, sure. Yeah, you want a toot? Bang, off we go. So it was, So we were close, and I knew Eddie and I knew Phil, and we'd bump into each other every now and then. Less close to Eddie and Phil than I was with Lemmy, because for obvious reasons. But yeah. But Lemmy followed.
Did you see those guys back in the day, the late '70s, early '80s, when the Ace of Spades, Bomber, Overkill?
Oh sure, yeah. But because again. Because of the incestuous district we lived in, because everyone was kind of living with each, in the same sort of places, and Lemmy at one point was in St. Luke's Road, which was right around the corner from where I was living, and and Filthy was there sometimes, and I knew Eddie's wife Sylvie, French girl Sylvie, really well, and Lemmy was hanging out also with Dick Mick. Dick Mick was a very close mate of mine. Dick Mick, who got Lemmy into Hawkwind in the first place, was also a speed dealer. And Dick Mick was with Izzy. Izzy was a very close friend of mine. Izzy had 2 children called Micah and Marshall, and a dog called Django, who taught the children how to walk. And we're talking
like
about,
you said, it's all incestuous. The synergy.
Yeah, we all knew each other. We all knew each other, still do. When I go to Brighton, I hook up with Brian James, who's an old mate from The Damned, and hook up with Andy Calhoun from Warsaw Pact, and etc. And when Alan was in Ipswich, I used to, hook up with Alan, and etc. It goes on. Dave Ambrose was in W.H. Pierce band when we were produced by Pink Floyd. Dave Ambrose then went on to become the head of EMI, who signed the Sex Pistols, Queen, Pet Shop Boys, etc., etc. Dave Ambrose, 40 years of legend after the band we were in together. Before that band, he was in Crazy World of Arthur Brown, that track Fire. And before that band, he was in Brian August Trinity, Wheels on Fire, Rolling Down the Road, that track. Very, very famous bands. And then he was in this little band, W.H. Pierce band with me and Martin Glover. And then we split up the band, and me and Dave Ambrose and Martin Glover formed a little band for a short while. And then Dave Ambrose got this offer of a lifetime to start heading up EMI's publishing version, and he became the head of EMI A&R, signing all these big bands. So it's all part of the same organism. It's like one big organism.
I can't wait to read your book. If you have an idea when it might be coming out, we could tell the viewers.
Well, yeah, absolutely. With the French version, I'm writing it in French first.
Okay.
Because French publishers wanted it first, and I'm preparing the English version in parallel, because obviously English is also my mother language. And so it's 2022 for sure. and then there'll be, I believe they're talking about doing a German version and a Portuguese version, Italian version, Norwegian version, because lots of fans in Norway. So with any luck, and it'll be fun. It's not for the faint-hearted. It's not a typical auto. It's not.
I wouldn't expect anything less.
It's not a typical autobiography. I believe you. It's not a typical autobiography. It's going to be. I'm writing from the gut. I'm writing from what it felt like to be inside Lucas. What it felt like to be inside Lucas. So you're going to get the smells of the squats. You're going to see the cockroaches on the wall. You're going to feel the carpet in the pub. The carpet in the pub sticking to your Santiago's cowboy boots. You're going to put your arm on the bar and it's going to stick to the bar. You're going to see Lemmy squeezing a blackhead out of the front of his arm while he's telling you a Tommy Cooper joke. You're going to live this. You're going to end up in bed with two girls who are just lovely, lovely people. And the real respect that you have for these two girls. But it just happens that two of them. And the sex is going to be real sex in all its wonderful detail, but without any disrespect for sex or for the people. And the drugs are going to be, well, fear and loathing. It's going to be feeling the walls going in and out and being obsessively this skull was one of the skulls I bought for Lemmy, right? It's got a key in the side, right? Because I found this really funny. I'd wind it up and put it on a bass drum head and it would roar around, right? And for me, this was Motörhead, right? It was just like Lemmy, it'd roar around this thing and not break out of the upended bass drum head, you see. And so I actually did 2 other versions of this actual skull, because I bought 3, and painted them with camouflage, and stuck the cross, the German cross on it, and various bits and pieces of tank and stuff to it, because I love making models, right? And then behind it, I had, because I had these made up by my girlfriend Ina. These were the SS bands that were on the jackets here. Like
you mean Motörhead bands? Wow.
So I had them made up, embroidered by Ina, my girlfriend, the Latvian crazy Ina.
Are those from back in the day?
For Bieber. Not this one. This isn't a genuine one. It's been remade.
But you did make that stuff back then.
Yeah. Had this made up.
Wow.
And the idea was to have this attached to the back of this skull, so it would be in a box, and this would be rolled up inside the box as a pressed git, and therefore they'd open the front of it, and this would be wound up, and it would roar out and pull behind it the box, and of course this across their desk.
Nice. I like that. Very
cool. So yeah, we got into lots of silly stuff, which was good. Go to bed with Motörhead was a catchphrase which Lemmy hated at the beginning, but Ina and I went and painted on a bomb site. There's all these bomb sites around at the time, even in the 70s, and there was this big one in Ladbroke Grove with a metal railing all the way down. And so we painted, late at night, we painted "Go to Bed with Motörhead" on it. And so we got into some good pranks, we had some good fun times, lots of stuff.
All right, well, I just wanted to show your album one more time. Lucas Fox from Motörhead.
Have you shown the inside? Because the inside's quite good as well.
Yeah, let me pull that out here. This is the original On Parole cover. That's right. Side A and B. And B and C has the liner notes.
Written by yours truly, absolutely.
It has all these amazing like historical photographs, old relics, old pens and stuff. Very cool. Oh, Blue Oyster Cult and Motörhead, Hammersmith Odeon right there in the corner.
That's right. There it is. It is. and you haven't got the marquee one because of the marquee, of course. You know, the Roundhouse, two Birmingham Barbarellas as well. You know, there's all those, you know, stuff as well.
His new band will be the dirtiest band in the world.
And it was. And it was.
If I
and the grass would die next.
I was about to say,
next
if we
door.
moved next door to your house, the grass would die.
And it did. And it did.
It did.
Absolutely. And
Well,
and
thank
of
you,
course,
sir.
the outside cover is the Canadian version. It was brought out in Canada. That cover.
This is okay.
That was the original Canadian version of On Parole, which is interesting.
Okay,
Which is
gotcha.
interesting. It is me, Larry, and Lemmy. It's not Larry, Lemmy, and Filthy.
Oh,
Canadian
got you,
version. Okay, so it's interesting that from the beginning, there's been this mystery, this ghost player.
The mystery man.
Apart from Lost Johnny, of course, you know, which I was credited on, but there's all the other ones which, you know, the ghost is still there. The ghost is in the machine.
Right.
This has been great fun, man, and you know, to all the viewers or listeners, whatever you are out there, stay safe. You know, get vaccinated if you can, because it's a good idea. We've got to crack this. Keep on rocking, and look out to the people who are on their own. Those people, you know, I mean, remember, born to lose, live to win. Think about all the people who are out there on their own. Reach out to them, because they're in need at the moment, particularly in these sorts of pandemics and stuff.
We're all
And
in
this
all in this together, right?
We're all in this together. It's right. And this ain't no Second World War. At the end of the Second World War, there are 35 million displaced persons in Europe, quite apart from 70 million dead. So this is not that. We're going to get through this. It is a bit different, sure, but let's not over dramatize either. We're going to look after each other. We're going to move this damn thing forward. And let's try and make it a better world and use this opportunity to make it a better world rather than just sink back into what we were doing before. It is possible to change this. It's shown us how vulnerable we are, how important people like doctors, nurses, and supermarket people, and people who deliver vegetables and food and meat and stuff are important. It's not just the people on the front line. It's not just people on stage who are superstars who are important. It's all those people who are in the audience, those fans, without which there would be no Motörhead. So to all of you out there, thank you. Thank you, really, from the bottom of my heart, that you've managed to carry this band over the last 45 years and are still doing it. Bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's really sweet, you know, sweet of you. But now from me to you, you know, stay safe and let's move on into the next era and try and make it better for everybody. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Skull. And Medir in Australia, is still awake there?
Yeah.
Well, it's morning here, so.
Absolutely, but you might have fallen asleep, my dear friend.
A legendary drummer here from Motörhead and Pink Fairies, Warsaw Pact. Thank you very much, Lucas Fox. It's always it's a pleasure. It was a great honor just to chat with you, and we'll be reaching out to you again. It was really an honor to talk to you, sir.
To the party! With that sight, movement, sound. Oh yeah, I see things. I want to rush. Yeah, the party. And here it comes now. I'm alive. And I'm not dead. that sound. Oh yeah, that's it there. Yeah, but just a raw sound. Oh, with us here. And here it goes now. I'm alive. And I'm master. For rock and roll. The doctor told me so. I'm master. For rock and roll. The doctor told me so. Told me so! I'm master for rock and roll. The doctor told me so! I'm master for sugar, I'm master for rock and roll. Master, yeah, honey, I'm master. Don't tell me so. Oh, doctor.
Welcome back to the Riff Crew. I hope you enjoyed that interview and that clip from Warped. That's a new single that they've released. I'm not sure if it's out online yet or not, so that might be a sneak peek preview. And of course, at the top of the show, we saw C.O.F.F.I.N, which was one of the gigs of the year. Sorry, Skull, but that may be a phrase that you're not going to be using for a while.
What?
Gig of the year.
Gig of the year?
Not to rub it in.
Maybe soon. Give it a few months. Everything's getting back to normal.
Well, fingers crossed. But I guess in the meantime, you've got that lovely record collection that you can dig up some classics that might be the secrets that people aren't all that familiar with.
Oh, one of the relics, one of the artifacts in the Chamber of the Cosmos.
Yeah, you're like the Indiana Jones of rock.
One of the keys of the cosmos. Well, yeah, we talked, something that tied in with like that amazing interview we just had with Lucas Fox. I'm still kind of soaking it all in, and kind of blew my mind a little bit, obviously. And he's releasing a book, so that's going to be really just for all the Motörhead fans out there and just rock fans from the 60s and 70s. Just so much the guy saw and lived and experienced, and the way he's explaining how it's going to be, you'll be able to see the smells and smell it and feel it, and just the imagery. It'll like be Technicolor essentially, but I'm excited to read it because it'll be amazing. I mean, but really excited to read that book when it comes out. Because like we were talking about before, it's really important for these tales to be told, because, just to carry that torch and to pass it on. So these stories don't get lost. But we were talking, you said maybe pick something Motörhead related. And I was like, you said pick one album. And I was like, that's fucking almost near goddamn impossible.
Yeah, it's like waterboarding.
It was,
it's like
because you could go back to, because we, Lucas Fox, we talked about, the Rocking Vickers, and Lemmy was in Sam Gopal. So I was thinking about maybe going back to the beginning, because I have this album right here, the Sam Gopal Experience. So I was thinking about talking about that, but, and then talking about, his influence on the Motörhead's influence. Like we're talking about them being the missing link for like metal, and the whole new wave of British heavy metal movement, they influenced bands like Tank, who essentially, was, Motorhead Jr., Filth Hounds of Hades, and how they influenced the emerging and new wave of British heavy metal influenced the emerging thrash metal scene, with Metallica in the early. So Motorhead was, as we discussed, the missing link between the early, the proto-punk and the hard rock and all that stuff, and the high energy, Detroit rock, the Stooges, MC5, and then the underground bands from like London, the Pink Fairies and the Deviants, and and bands like that. But I was thinking, just to nail it down to one album, I thought it would have to be an album that kind of launched what the beginning of Motorhead. And as we talked to Lucas, that album, of course, is this album. It's Lemmy's last album with Hawkwind. It's the album. It's called "The Warrior on the Edge of Time," and it's the last album he did before he was unceremoniously kicked out of the band for quote unquote doing the wrong kinds of drugs. Although Lemmy admittedly was doing every drug under the sun except never heroin. He was famously was anti-heroin, but he was basically doing more speed than the rest of the guys, and so everyone else was hippy dippy, smoking weed and doing acid or whatever. But this was his last album. Oh, as you can see here, this is the call sign. It says WRIU, which is actually the radio station I was a DJ at school, University of Rhode Island, 91.1 or 91.3. But
So
did
you clean out their record collection when you left uni?
Yeah, when I was a DJ there, I borrowed a few records, and this was one of the records that I borrowed. So thank you, WRU. And it was a lot of records that they were getting rid of anyway. But it's not in the greatest. Well, the sleeve is not in the greatest shape, but the vinyl is in great shape. And also that they cataloged it by the sticker up here. But this album, I thought was really vital to talk about because this is the absolute progenitor to what became Motorhead. And we didn't even get to talk to Lucas about the name of the band, Motorhead, because I know famously at one time Lemmy wanted to name the band Bastards, but they were like, well, that's probably not going to go over too well. The reason I mentioned why this album is such a pivotal album in Lemmy's career and Motorhead is because it's his last album, and it's not on here, but there's a song on here called Kings of Speed, was released as a single, and the B-side was a song called Steve.
Mate, you've got me there. You stopped me.
Motorhead. The B-side to Kings of Speed was called Motorhead. It was the last song that Lemmy wrote for Hawkwind before he got kicked out of the band. And so he took, like we had discussed, he took, his popularity, if you will, the fact that they had like a huge hit with Silver Machine, and, he had already been writing a few songs for the band here and there. So when he got kicked out of the band, he pulled up by his bootstraps, with the help of his good friend Lucas, guiding him in the right direction, encouraging him to forge ahead. And so he took that last song, took the name of the song, and took the image and took the whole vibe and took everything and basically created, which is the missing link to all the music that we have been talking about, one of the greatest bands of all time, which is Motorhead, arguably because of all of the genres that they created. I mean, you can say Black Sabbath and bands like that, but really Motorhead really influenced the new wave of British heavy metal and the whole thrash metal movement, and Metallica, which is one of the biggest bands on the planet. Love them or hate them at right now. but so to me, this is the album that I picked, and it's important for a lot of those reasons. And I also want to say that the name this album, Warrior on the Edge of Time, is actually the whole concept of the album is based on a work by an author named Michael Moorcock, an English author, the Eternal Champions and the Heroes, Elric, and there's other heroes as well. And Dave Brock and all those guys were science fiction fans, and they were, friends of Moorcock. Moorcock was a member of Hawkwind. He actually wrote some songs on here. Also, there's some on Space Ritual. He performed with them on occasion. And it's important to note, I just want to say as well that ties into this book that I mentioned with Lucas before about how I collaborated with Alan Davey, who was, he was the second or third bass player for Hawkwind. But my friend published this book, Jim Kirkland, on Dreaming City Books. It's called Urusha's Horde, and he's done interviews with Moorcock, and it's about all things Elric and the Eternal Champion. There's an interview with Moorcock in here. There's also an interview with Rob Weir from Tigers of Pantang, and Alan Davey from Hawkwind and Hawkstroll and Gunslinger, who also the Pink Fairies, who's friends with Lucas. So this is a cool little book. I collaborated on this book. So if there are any people out there that are also interested in, Michael Moorcock and, Elric and that kind of stuff, science fiction, fantasy. And there's, like I said, there's some cool interviews in there that I collaborated on. So go check it out, and check out this album, of course, Warrior on the Edge of Time. And that's my pick. Steve Oz, what's your pick?
Well, my one's also Motörhead influence, but it's not Motörhead, and it's probably a band that most people watching this have never heard of, and it's a band called Electro-Shock Therapy. I've actually got the CD here, which I picked up in Minsk about 15 years ago, and the reason why I picked it up in Minsk is this is a Russian band, or was a Russian band, during Soviet times. So that during their career, they've changed their sound a lot with different, I guess, influences over the years. But
so what year would that be, you think?
This was recorded in '89, I think.
Oh wow, that's early then.
The original, yeah, because this particular album, the self-titled album, was their first album. And the reason why I picked it is it's Russian Motörhead. You listen to
Russian
it.
Motörhead.
It sounds
I'm gonna have to listen to it
like
now.
Motörhead. Exactly like Motörhead. The whether it's the guitar tone, the vocals, the songwriting, even the quality of the music. It's a great album. But it's.
Are they singing in Russian or English?
It's mostly Russian. So there's
Okay.
a few songs in here. I'll hold it up. It's probably a bit blurry for people, but some of the song titles are in English. And there was a major festival during Perestroika days. I think it was around '89 or '90, where it was the first festival where Western bands played in Russia, and they played on this bill. I think AC/DC might have been on that as well.
Ozzy played that Motley Crue, Gorky Park. I've heard about that.
It was in an airfield.
There was like 100,000 people there or something.
It was
like that.
massive.
It was a huge deal.
Yeah, so this is just if you're looking for that lost album, maybe
Scorpions played that.
Yeah, so if you're looking for that lost Motörhead album that never existed, then dig the first one up. The later ones don't sound like this one, and I have a few of them, but I don't like them as much as this one. I believe it's been reissued this year as well, so you might be able to actually pick up a physical copy if you're after it.
All right. Well, I'm going to cheat here a little bit too, and I'm just going to throw this out there. Alan Davey was also, when he first started before Hawkwind, he was in a band called Gunslinger, and he is a Lemmy freak. And so if anyone's into this, which I know you are, Gunslinger's super cool too. It's like it's Alan Davey band. It's basically a cross between Motörhead and Hawkwind, and that's another one of those you could check out too.
Cool. All right. Well, it's been another great show, another great interview, and we're going to close off the show with the hottest band in Australia. I think it's time that we retire AC/DC and bring in someone who's bigger than AC/DC. And that band is called Pizza Death.
What?
Pizza Death.
Pizza Dick?
Yeah. No. Death, mate.
No,
like
Death.
Choc Shaldina.
Not Pizza Dick. Okay.
That's a good name for a band, but no. It's Pizza Death. They're like modern day Alchemists because they've combined crossover thrash with pizzas.
Oh, okay.
So it's like two of the greatest things that exist. And I scored one of their set lists at a recent show. I'll just show it here. That's their set.
That's a pizza box.
Yeah, I'm just hoping it doesn't have mold growing on the back where there's the cheese and stuff like that. So, and
that's their set list.
Yeah, that's their set list. And I got a very special a merch item from their singer Pat. I'm not sure if you can see that, but that is a Pizza Death pizza cutter, pizza slicer.
Nice.
So I'm not sure how many. I believe this is the prototype. So I'm not sure how many they're looking to press. Maybe that's going to come out with their album. So it's literally going to be Pizza Death. If you're not careful with it. So
that's funny.
So yeah, we'll check it out, and we'll see you soon, Skull.
All right. Well, remember to look to the stars, carry the torch of enlightenment, and strive to be a disciple of rock and roll and the Brotherhood of Orpheus. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Steve Oz, and see you again next time. Rock and roll, my friends.
Slice of death! Pizza Death!
We're Pizza Death. My favourite part about that song is when we see Pizza Death. Woo!
And up your cheeseburger greatest is coming. And they will not stop until they shred you all. They'll tear you apart, they'll do every serious way. Until they transcend your blistering remain. We'll tell about them. Greatest of death.
Mozzarella Massacre! Waiting to death! Mozzarella Massacre! Waiting to death! Mozzarella Massacre! Waiting to death! This giant fire trains in the depths of crazy and die like the will of villains! She's not the bubble and burn! What the solid bit of these? Why to be wretched wait for peace? Mozzarella Massacre! Treated to death! Mozzarella Massacre! Treated to death! Mozzarella Massacre! Treated to death! Mozzarella Massacre!
Kind of like fucking Flavor Flav, but more flavorful. Yeah.
The flavor is Flav. Yeah, boy! Alright, this is a song about ordering a pizza with radioactive cheese on it, causing it to grow and grow and grow to a nuclear family size.
I want a different family size! Without TV and inside, little float of us! Pick a fight, genocide, human family size! We have a TV and flow inside, little float of us! We destroy, genocide! So good, so cheesy! With a story that was gonna be easy! You blow and be a nigga! That all of it I'm gonna deliver it to me! Inside of the house! Inside of the house! I want a different family size! With a team making it grow inside! Little sound of ice! Piece of blood! Genocide! Little family size! We have team making it grow inside! Little sound of ice! Piece of blood! Genocide! So good! So cheesy! With a story that was gonna be easy! Still growing, bigger and bigger! Turn on them in the game!
Just deliver it to me. It's too fucking big. It won't fit in the car. Thank you.
Remember, look to the stars, carry a torch of enlightenment, and strive to be a rock and roll disciple in the Brotherhood of Orpheus. Till next time.